Hey there, we're the Westlot Pirates and welcome to the show. We're here to share our thoughts on Northwestern athletics and college sports with thoughts and analysis from the visceral to the statistical. We're on our tailgate with the red pirate flag flying high above as we give no quarter, especially the fourth. I'm Sam Walter.
I'm John Lacombe.
And I'm Eric Scuzz. A day like today calls for old Pulteney boys.
Oh, baby. Oh, I'm jealous.
It's a celebration.
That's right. It's a great day for Northwestern sports. Starting up obviously with lacrosse winning the opening round against Denver. I mean, winning is understating. I mean, it was an absolute curb stomping of Denver.
Thrashing.
I mean, the fact that you went to the running clock after a 10-goal lead at the end of the first half. I mean, that's what it was. I mean, the entire second half was just killing clock because it was over. But for them to win that game, advance to play Penn on Thursday, and then softball to go down to the Austin Regional. Why not us? Let's shock the world. Let's take out number one Texas. Why not? Right?
Absolutely. Next week, let's all be talking about how Northwestern absolutely shocked the world, and we're going to talk, of course, about Izzy's record. And we're going to get to all that stuff with our very special guest. I know some of you are definitely being like, what about Recruitapalooza? What about Mike Wright? What about this unbelievable run of new Wildcats to the football team? We're going to hit it all. We're going to get to all of it. It's a smorgasbord tonight. We've got a lot on our plate.
And as you mentioned, Noah Coffman will be joining us here in just a sec. And can't wait to talk to him about everything. I mean, he has such a great knowledge of both lacrosse and softball. And, I guess without any further ado, let's tap into his knowledge and get him on right now. Well, we are thrilled to be joined once again by Noah Coffman. Noah, who you might know, calls lacrosse games for Big Ten Network. We wanted to have you back on this again this year, Noah, because I mean, you have just dove into lacrosse and softball like no one else. And, how much you know about these teams is just second to none. So we wanted to have you on, especially with, lacrosse going to the semis or going to the quarterfinals, Izzy Scane breaking the record, and then softball, going to Austin to take on number one Texas in the Austin Regional. So wanted to get your thoughts on all that. But first of all, thanks for jumping back on with us. We really appreciate it.
Of course, guys. Always my pleasure. So fun to be able to hop on with you guys. It is really a blast.
I want to mention, too, right off the top, that we mentioned two of your big three sports, but let's not give short shrift to field hockey either. You know as much about field hockey as anyone, which was on display when I had the privilege of watching you talk shop with Lauren Wattis at the WNRS tailgate. Which was, so you can do it all is what we're saying. But we're here for the lax and the softball today.
Well, you got to lead with Izzy Scane breaking the record. She came into the game tied for the most career goals scored, and with just a great right off the top, breaks the record and then keeps on going as the Cats just absolutely obliterate Denver. But, start with Izzy. I mean, she has had just an incredible journey. And what do you make of her?
Yeah, I mean, in general, I think I'll talk about this particular game and how I think it was kind of a microcosm of her career in a little bit. But, she is, every cliche about an elite athlete. We've seen so many of them used to apply to a Boo Buie over the last 3 years, right? To apply to a Danielle Williams, although she was a very different type of athlete than a Boo Buie or an Izzy Scane over the last 3 years. Izzy is all of those, and I mean that in the best way possible. She is the first one in, last one out type, of course. She's also the give love to her teammates over everything. We're talking about a woman who hasn't tweeted on her actual Twitter account in 3 years. And when she did, she never tweeted about herself. She does not use, she does not keep the focus on herself like that. A consummate team player, only in as far as, when it's time to go score, she's going to go score. Everything you can say about Izzy is probably true in terms of how great she is as a leader, as a teammate, as a as a lacrosse player, and from all accounts, a person as well. I've only met her a couple of times, but everything I've heard about her is, as good as it gets. She's as good as it gets. She really deserved the moment that she got this weekend.
There is a good comp to Boo, and something that we talked a lot about with Boo Buie and just the way his game evolved. Especially this year, allowing the scoring to come to him, and I felt very much the same with Izzy. As the year started, it's not that she was like not on fire scoring goals, but I feel like in the past we've seen her chalk up some big numbers, some crooked numbers, if you will, to use a baseball parlance. But she was just kind of averaging a very steady 5 goals a game, which like is a very high number, I might add. But I don't feel like that ever waned. But then, like as we got down the stretch here, there were a couple teams were bringing defense and attention to her in ways that they hadn't before. Was it Penn State in the Big Ten tournament? I'm thinking about who just, they basically wouldn't let her get inside or even within a few feet of the arc. And so if she was going to shoot, it was blasting from far back. But it struck me how comfortable she was this year from the get-go. I mean, this was not something that she had to kind of get comfortable with as the year went on, which I felt was a little bit more true with Boo, but just from the get-go, allowing the game to come to her, setting up her teammates, and you can see the momentum that this team has built up on the back of that, of her as their stalwart leader, just by the score of the Denver game this weekend versus, a team that they played earlier in the season and went from a 4-point margin to a 13-point margin. So it's a good comp to Boo, and I agree with you, Noah. I think everything is true about her. What else is going on with this team that maybe we just use Denver as the benchmark here? How have they improved to this degree?
Yeah, I think, Scuzz, one thing you pointed out, right, was Izzy getting comfortable with the way the defenses have handled her, right? It's not often in lacrosse you see a player get face guarded as consistently as she has over the last 2, even 3 years, right? And teams haven't actually been able to do it to her quite as much this year because of the emergence of Madison Taylor, who we'll talk about a lot. Obviously, freshman of the year last year, still has taken such a massive leap this season. It's almost unbelievable. Twerton, finalist as a sophomore, the only non-senior to be a finalist for the award this year. She's been unbelievable, and it makes it, of course, Erin Kuykendall and Tilda Monte's had a great year, Lindsey Frank coming in. But, of course, that makes it harder for teams to face guard Izzy, but they're still going to do it, right? And I think this Denver game was such a microcosm of that, right? Izzy getting the record and all of it, letting all of it come to them, right? You mentioned, or we mentioned before we got on, actually, we were talking about how the 2 Denver games this year were very different, right? In the first one, it was a battle all the way. Northwestern led for much of that game. That was a game I was on the call for inside the field house. Northwestern led for much of the way, but Denver just didn't let them have anything easy. They fouled them. They fouled Northwestern over 40 times in that game. I believe the final number was 46. I don't have it in front of me, unfortunately.
Much like last year's Final Four.
Exactly. Yeah. That's what Denver does. They're a very physical defense, right? They're going to force the ball out of your best player's hands by guarding them 45, 50 feet away from the goal. Way more than that. That's understating, but like way outside. 45, 50, 60 feet even away from the goal at times. And being in their face, and they're not worried about getting a few fouls to work with that. You could tell that rattled Northwestern a little bit, not just in last year's Final Four, which they very quickly overcame, but earlier this year in the regular season, which they had a little bit of a harder time with. And in the postseason, this team just grows a level of confidence and has the last couple of years that I think is just unmatched in this sport and really in many sports. They pass through those double teams, that face guarding so much quicker. A lot of that credit goes to Kuykendall. A lot of it goes to Taylor, who can just run around players. She's just got that quickness that not many other players have. But of course, it all comes back to Izzy Scane and what she's able to do to work through those defenses as well. And not to take anything away from Northwestern's defense, which has been, in my opinion, fantastic all season, and it's really even taken another step up. They've dealt with injuries at times this season, but it is, in my opinion, the best defense that Northwestern has had since at least 2012. And it's because they have these seniors working together, and you saw that on full effect against Denver as well. So, again, it's a team at the height of its powers right now, and you saw that on both sides of the ball against Denver. And not to take away from the draw circle efforts, which were, as usual, very good.
It's funny. I was thinking about a conversation that we briefly had right before we started up the pod, and not to get in. I don't want to put myself in the middle of this T-Wolves Nuggets thing that Scuzz and Sam have going on right now. We don't want to.
How dare you?
We don't want to go down that road. But you did mention briefly, like an interesting analogy, talking about comparing this team to the Nuggets from the perspective of. It does feel, certainly over the past couple of games, no shots, Scuzz, that when they want to find that extra gear, that it's there. And it's funny, you mentioned the first Denver game, the game that you called, and how rough it was. And in my mind, that actually reminded me a little of the Hopkins game, in the Big Ten tournament. And right, and just teams that just want to be so physical with us. Because, I mean, that's because they're outgunned and they know it, and they're just trying to find an equalizer. And, I mean, again, not to take away from Hopkins and Penn State, who look like two very good teams, and we were talking about the overall growth of depth in this sport, just over the past couple of years. But it does feel like, as tough as the sledding was going against Hopkins, that in a game like the second Denver game, when this team hits that other level, and it's like when everything is clicking and they're going to that place that only they can go, that just no one can stay with them.
It really does, and I think it's going to be a good test on Thursday here against Penn. Sorry, can I just switch gears to us talking about Penn? Is that okay?
Absolutely.
Now?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So just to bring it, to sort of zoom out a little bit as I go to talk about this matchup with Penn and about Northwestern seeming like they can turn it on. Last year, it's really easy to forget because it happened so early on. But I had Northwestern's round of 16 game against Michigan. Northwestern won that game 8-7.
That's right.
In the round of 16. 8-7. And they were very much in danger. Now, Michigan did not really have much of an offense to speak of last year. They kind of still don't, but they're a really good defense. They're a really good team. Nobody has defended Northwestern better over the last 2 years, even a Denver, even a Boston College, even a Syracuse, even, the great programs. Nobody has defended Northwestern better or more consistently than Hannah Nielsen's Michigan. And Penn and Michigan this year played against each other, and the final score of that game was 6-5.
I was just looking at that. I laughed.
That's a Big Ten West lacrosse right there.
Yeah, exactly. So this, as you might be able to tell from that scoreline, this is a Penn team that is defense first. Now, I don't think they have the defensive talent of a Michigan. I don't think they have the necessarily defensive togetherness of a Michigan. They certainly don't have the background with Northwestern of a Michigan and a Hannah Nielsen. How could they? But it's a great defense. It's going to be a real test for Northwestern, and it's a Penn team. It's an Ivy League team. They have played some real competition, though. They played Michigan. Yale is very good this year. They've seen them twice. Princeton is quite good this year. They've seen them twice. The Ivy is up right now, and Penn is looking like a real threat for Northwestern. So I think
it's interesting. This is going to be the third time Penn will have played the number one ranked team this year, because when they played at Maryland. When Maryland was number one, they played at Yale when Yale was number one, and now they get Northwestern.
Sorry, because that's Yale number one.
Oh, is that Yale one in the tournament? Oh, that's
they were still top five. I mean, they're still top five team.
Yeah. All right. Strike my comments from the record. That's a stupid way to tag your schedule, but whatever. Your point is well taken. They have definitely played some solid talent. On the they played Michigan tough. Yes, Yale is really good, but by the same token, they lost by 4 to Maryland. They lost by 1 to Hopkins. So some of the other common talent that are common, opponents with Northwestern have. They beat Hopkins by 1, but these are teams Northwestern should be. They're gonna have their hands full because it's a tournament game, and you always do. But this still feels like a pretty sizable advantage for the Cats.
Yeah, I mean, look, the Northwestern's a better team. There's no doubt about that. Penn is a scrappy bunch. They've got some really, really strong midfielders who were probably snubbed, especially Anna Brandt in the All-American honors. It's a team that can defend you really well, like I mentioned, right? That can defend you all over the field, be in the face of your best players. But Northwestern has the most attacking talent in the country and has all year, right? And when it comes down to it, in the in crunch time situations, no team has been able to stop Madison Taylor, Aaron Kuykendall, and Izzy Scane. Nobody. Notre Dame at the very start of the season in that weird dome they play in, at the very start of the year, maybe just them. Other than that, nobody. And I don't think it's going to start now with Penn. Now, it is very similar to last year's Denver game, which Northwestern, again, struggled with Denver a little bit early on, turned it on very quickly. Penn, like Denver, isn't a team that traditionally gets top talent, but plays very together, has a lot of really good, strong players, and a really strong scheme that they all buy into really heavily. Similar matchup to that matchup, but Northwestern, clear favorite, and for good reason.
It's also funny, too. I mean, we were talking about we're searching for common opponents. I mean, Scuzz was just talking about that going through their schedule. Well, searching for common opponents isn't something that feels like we have to do very often. Northwestern's last 3 lacrosse games were all against teams they'd played earlier in the season already, and the game before that was Michigan, which we hadn't played them, but that feels like a team that we know literally better than any team. I mean, the familiarity. I think we even talked about the familiarity on the pod last year with you. So it's interesting to pivot between like those 4 matches in a row and then a team that familiarity isn't there with. Do you think that that's going to be a factor at all?
Sometimes, the feeling out process sometimes. But again, last year Denver was a new face, right? And Northwestern figured them out pretty quickly. So it can definitely be a factor. But with teams this veteran, lacrosse is a sport where there's lots of different defensive schemes, of course, but there's only so many. It's not like there are teams, except for like a Denver, maybe, like a Michigan, maybe. There's not teams playing, unique schemes. There's just variations on stuff. So there's nothing really that's going to get thrown at Northwestern that they're not at least in some way expecting. The feeling out process might go. And, speaking of familiar teams, take a look at who's left in the tournament. There are always possibilities for upsets. But in my opinion, outside of Northwestern, the 4 best teams left in the tournament are Maryland, who if they beat Florida, who upset Virginia, Northwestern would face in the semifinals, potentially, Michigan, Boston College, and Syracuse, who are all on the other side of the bracket. So lots of familiarity left to go for Northwestern if they can get by Penn. Again, unless Florida pulls off the shocker against Maryland. Wouldn't be surprised to see it. Wouldn't hate it either.
Wouldn't be the first time Maryland's been upset in the postseason in the past couple of weeks. So, which was weird because that was the thing. I mean, we were talking about it too. I mean, that's the weird thing about the Michigan was that, I think that was one we had circled, right? Like, oh man, if we play Michigan again, like, how's it going to go down? And then it never came up. So, I mean, it isn't, but I mean, you made the point too that like Northwestern in the postseason is Northwestern in the postseason, and that they find this unbelievable gear. And kind of taking us back to where we started relative to lacrosse, Izzy, who again, in a team stacked with talent, you have this one player who stands above just the career accomplishments alone. I'm curious. I was at the Big Ten Tournament Lacrosse final. And we talked about it on the pod, but she's one of those players that seeing her in person is spectacular. The way that she stands out. And she's one of those players that, when people talk about this with sports, that when you see her in person, the athleticism, the way she plays the game, it just jumps out at you. You're someone who's arguably watched her in person more than anybody over the past 4 years. You've called games. You've been in the stands for games. You've been there for the Izzy Scane era. You've watched it all rise. Like, how has it been for you? What was it like for you? How have you seen that player evolve? The player you first set eyes on when she was a freshman to the player who holds that career record?
Well, it's really interesting, John, right? So back in 2019, I was when that season began, I was what year was I? I'm trying to think about it now. I was in my sophomore spring. I had watched the year before, Selena Lesota, the legend leading the team, but that was a team that could only go so far. In 2019, it was a better team, still a team that could only go so far. They bounced out in the Final Four. A great team, Madison Doucette, in goal, Izzy, Lauren Gilbert, I'm missing a ton of names, obviously, Ali Palermo, Jill Girardi, etc. Brennan Dwyer. Tons of great players, but the way that Izzy has elevated her game, she was already one of the best players on that 2019 team, right? Next to a Lauren Gilbert, in front of a great defense, surrounded by great players. but she elevates her game every single year, and it's really impressive to see. And the other thing that always sticks out to me about Izzy Scane is the exact moment when you start thinking in your head when you're watching a game, hey, I haven't seen Izzy in a while. She hasn't really impacted the game in a while, is exactly when she does something to impact the game. Whether it be in the midfield, tracking back, making a play to cause a turnover in transition. They've had her out on defense a couple of times this year, something they did a lot back in 2019, making a play there, something that she can do that not a lot of other great attacking players in the history of the game have been able to do with consistency. But more often than not, right? Always finding a goal when they need it. Finding a goal that nobody else would have been able to score. Finding that goal from 25 feet away. Finding that goal after weaving through two defenders. Finding that free position chance after Northwestern's offense had been stuck in the mud for 4 minutes. It's exactly the time when you think, man, it would really be great if somebody could come make a play for this team. That's when Izzy Scane makes a play every single time. It's really remarkable just how often it happens. And it makes you spoiled as a fan of Northwestern lacrosse. That not only have you gotten to see Izzy Scane do that, but truly, I think Madison Taylor is already starting to do the same thing as a true sophomore, and we're going to get to see 2 more years of that exact, formula in action for Northwestern lacrosse. It really is incredible what this offense has become with those two, and of course, Erin Kuykendall holding it all together. I feel like I give her short shrifts sometimes by not mentioning her right away with those two, but it's really something.
You mentioned how remarkable it is, and that's a great way to pivot to the softball team. Being that that's their kind of moniker, their catchphrase. Softball obviously wins the Big Ten regular season, gets upset in the first round of the Big Ten tournament by an Indiana team who we just saw, and while we might have just been a fringe host of a sectional, now all of a sudden we're going down to Austin to take on the number 1 team in the land. That it's a rough pull, but what do we know of Texas, and also what do you make of the softball team, how they came down the stretch, and if that Big Ten tournament cost them hosting. Cost of a sectional.
Well, they certainly were not in conversation for hosting a regional, partially due to some bad luck. Northwestern only had the chance to play 3 top 25 games this year. They had 3 more get rained out. So, top 25 RPI, of course,
including a game against Texas.
Exactly.
Oh,
so
that's right.
They had their chances to play some big teams. They had Texas and Oklahoma State on the schedule, both washed out. Those are 2 top 4 teams. Not only that, the 3 top 25 RPI games they did play lost all by 1 run. 1-0, 1-0, and 13-12. That LSU game is the 13-12 one, of course. So some really bad breaks for this team, and a team that was very young early in the season, which is when they get the chance to play their top 25 RPI games. Luckily, we don't have to say that anymore starting next year, but that's traditionally when Northwestern gets the chance to play their top-tier RPI opponents. And, it's not unfair to the team to say they weren't ready for that moment, partially because they were so young. This is a team that 6 out of their 9 defensive starters are underclassmen, and they were still getting, used to the big stage. Kate Drohan and Caden Carroll and Michelle Gascoigne were still figuring out exactly who to use in what spots. And so they couldn't get those resume wins that are needed for a regional host. Now, I don't think the Indiana Big Ten tournament game cost them much. This is a team that was always around 30th in RPI. KPI is being used now. They were always a little bit higher in that, but not much. They were always going to be a lower end 2 seed within a regional, right? So if you think about it, 64 teams make the NCAA softball tournament. Top 16 get to host the regionals. Next 16 are the 2 seeds within each regional. Then the next 16 are the 3, next 16 are the 4, etc. So, thinking about from a basketball perspective, same thing happened. Those bottom tier 2 seeds are usually going to get the top seeds, even though the NCAA says that they don't rank 1 through 32. They only rank 1 through 16, and then 17 through 32. They say it's a crapshoot. Hopefully I can say that. That's what they say. I don't fully believe that, but even if it was, Northwestern was going to get a good team. They've had a run of not getting great teams in regional play when they haven't hosted recently. They were going to get one. Now, did it have to be Texas? Certainly not. And Texas is a bad draw for anybody. Maybe the only worst draw would have been Oklahoma. It's hard to say. They're 2 very, 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 very elite teams this year. There's no team this year like the Oklahoma of years past, in my opinion. There's no completely unbeatable super mega softballopolis. That's evidenced by the fact that Oklahoma isn't in the 1 slot, but Texas is really, really good.
Noah, something you said when we were talking about the lacrosse team is you remarked about how veteran the squad is this year, and that's allowed them to really figure out opponents and the physical defense and things that they've seen throughout the course of the season. The softball team is the opposite, right? They turn over an incredible amount of the roster, like you were talking. We had this conversation with Sydney Supley a couple weeks ago, and she talked about just how much the coaching staff had to focus on teaching this year. It's just a really different vibe and focus from those last couple seasons where they had such a tenured group of women on the squad. How do you see? I mean, obviously the team has really come into their own throughout the course of the year. How do you see that youth movement approaching the NCAA tournament now? Do you think we're going to see something different from Kate and Carol and the coaching staff, or do you think it's going to be pretty similar to how they've approached the last couple seasons?
I think it'll be similar. The real thing, it doesn't actually have that much to do with youth movement about the way that you approach these regionals is nobody's been more aggressive than Kate Drohan and the rest of her staff in terms of using an ace pitcher in must-win games, right? We all remember again in Tempe when Danielle pitched all 450 pitches in that weekend. They've attacked games with their ace over and over. Well, Ashley Miller's in the worst stretch of the season right now, right? She can't find the plate with consistency. In her last 4 outings, she's walked or hit at least 5 batters in all 4. And that last outing was just an inning and a third. She struggled with her command of late. Now, the silver lining of that Indiana loss, right, was blessing in disguise maybe because it let Northwestern get a week off. It let Ashley maybe have more time to fully reset. Will she, find that command? Because that's going to determine a lot of how much the youth movement really is there. The next 2 best pitchers on this team with consistency have been Renee Cunningham and, when she's been healthy, Riley Grudzelanek. If Ashley doesn't have it, we're going to see a lot of Renee and Riley this weekend. And obviously that offense, of Kelsey Nader in particular, who has been phenomenal the last couple weeks, has been driven by the youngsters as well. So if Ashley Miller continues to struggle, it might be all the kids playing. It really, a lot of it rides on number one's shoulders, and that's how it is in this sport. One player, the pitcher, the ace, has so much on their shoulders in the postseason.
We're going over the early season resume of this team, and it was a great callback to, we're talking about Ashley Miller, the reigning Big Ten pitcher of the year, and you can argue that some of her very best outings came before the stretch she won Big Ten Pitcher of the Year for. Right? And this is the thing. It's like we're talking about Ashley Miller's control issues of late. First of all, we could talk about on-off splits versus pitching versus Indiana pitching versus anyone else. Let's hope maybe it's just an Indiana thing, But that stretch of 1-0s where she's pitching against some of the best teams in the country and giving up 1 run and losing, right? And it was like the offense hadn't coalesced. Well, now it's very much, at least down the stretch of Big Ten play, a different team in terms of like the young bats that have come alive, the way this team has found offense. And right, I think, right, if the young pitchers have to go, they have to go. But I think, would you agree? I think it's very much the feeling of we just want to see Ashley Miller's best. Again, number one is number one. But we really want to see her best because I think we all want to know, right? Where is this team? Advance out of the regional, not advance out of the regional. But when this team is giving its very best, how do they match up with Texas? How do they match up with the best in the country?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's also why I kind of want to see Renee and Riley go against Texas. Because, look, as great as Ashley's been this year, and she has been great, a godsend for this team, and has brought it. And without her, they never win the Big Ten championship for the 3rd year in a row. She's done after this year, right? And this is a team that brings so much back for the next 2 years. Again, just to compare softball and lacrosse one more time, because it's got me back in the mood. Northwestern lacrosse, for the most part of this season, has had 7 out of their 11 starters seniors plus. That includes 2 6th years, 3 5th years. We're talking about nobody has ever had this level of veteranness as lacrosse, right? Northwestern, 3 first years in the starting lineup, 3 sophomores, 1 one junior in Ayanna Lindsay, who had never started before this year, a fifth year in Angela Zedak, a senior in Hannah Katie, and a transfer senior in Ashley Miller. That's the starting lineup, right? So, and the next two pitchers are first years. Cami Henry has been a great fourth pitcher, and she'll be on us this year too. But how much can this team build off this weekend is, to me, a great question because, again, beating Texas once, would be incredibly difficult, doable with Ashley Miller's best game. We've seen her, one run against UCLA, one run against a lot of great teams. She's pitched great against great teams all year. Beating a team this good twice is really, really hard. For people who don't watch softball, it's hard for me to impart to you how good this Texas offense is without having seen them. And you could argue the pitching is better than the offense. In fact, I probably would make that argument for much of this season. So it's a really good team. That, just to put it in perspective, okay, Texas has 5 pitchers that have thrown at least 22 innings. They have 4 pitchers who have thrown at least 50 innings. All of those pitchers have an ERA below 2.15. All 5 of them, okay? We're talking about a lineup, okay, that has 7 players with an OPS above 1,000 and all 9 with an OPS above 910. All 9. The entire starting lineup has an OPS above 910. This is a murderer's row. Mike White has this team cooking. They are really, really good in every area of the game. So look, can Ashley Miller limit them? Of course she can. She has maybe the best changeup in the sport. Her drop ball when it's on is magnificent, But at the same time, Texas is fantastic, and it's really tough with their depth to keep them down for multiple games because they can just keep throwing pitchers at you. I mean, their worst pitcher by the numbers, and Mac Morgan is quite good. It's Mac Morgan, who is a name that may be ringing a bell, maybe, or you guys may have forgotten, which is understandable, because she was the ace of the Arizona State staff 2 years ago in Tempe. She is the 5th best pitcher on this team, in my opinion. Now, they don't use her the 5th most, but in my opinion, she's the 5th best pitcher on this team. So, that should give you some idea of how good this Texas team is. They are really good.
I suppose the flip side, though, is, you're freed from expectation, right? There's nothing but just real estate to be had here, nothing but a chance to shock the world. And I think maybe a unifying thing across lacrosse and softball. You mentioned, you were talking about, I said go back and talk about Izzy Scane's earliest years, right? And you do a really good job connecting that to the era that came before, right? And what you start to see is, and this is obviously dovetails directly with the unbelievable job that Coach Strohan did with softball this season, the common thread through both is culture, right? And it's the culture, and people like to use culture like a buzzword, but let me tell you, I watched Caitlin Clark play her first game for the Indiana Fever tonight, and you can put a bunch of talented players on a team that has no chemistry and no idea of how each other play and how things work, and there's no culture of winning, and they just got bulldozed. And then you watch the flip side, and it's you see it, right? These are both two teams that, again, you've seen as much, if not more so than anybody, that have a culture, and a culture built around coaches, and a culture built around just winning and doing things the right way in the big moments.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to break down the regional a little bit more, because I don't think I fully got into it. We mentioned St. Francis and Sienna also in this regional. Texas, the top seed in the regional, Northwestern, the 2, will play St. Francis first. The Red Flash are a really good team within the NEC. They don't play a lot of top talent during the year, but they're a really good team. Now, they're one of the weaker 3 seeds. It's a really good draw for Northwestern in that regard. This is not an at-large 3 seed. If you think about it, basketball, there are at-larges that get in those 3s that Northwestern would have had to play in the first round. St. Francis is not one of those. It's the difference between being just like in any other bigger college tournament, the difference between the 35th best team in the country and the 60th, 70th best team in the country. So potentially a good draw for Northwestern in that regard, and that maybe, St. Francis is a little bit easier for them to handle. It's still a very good team, but maybe you can save your best shot for Texas in a way that you wouldn't have otherwise been able to, and let that culture really come to bear. It's hard for me to talk about this Northwestern softball team, and they're not thinking about it, of course, but without talking about the future. And I don't want to take away from what Hannah Katie, Angela Zidak did in their time here. Two of my favorites of all time. And they've brought so much to this program, and you don't want to see them go out. Love to see them for sure be playing on Sunday and hopefully giving Texas a run for their money this weekend. But them two and Ashley Miller, of course, and Cammie Henry. But this team brings so much back, and they bring in a top recruiting class. I know you guys are going to talk a lot about football recruiting today. Let's bring it into the public consciousness. Kate Drohan is bringing in a top 5 player in the country next year who turned down Oklahoma to play shortstop or potentially third base, whatever they decide to do with that. They're bringing in, 2 other top 60 recruits in the country next year for softball, maybe room for a transfer. This is a team that is so on the upward swing right now. To think, and I know you guys have talked about this a little bit, but to think they won the Big Ten championship this year, complete rebuilding year. Rebuild. It was a rebuild 100%. Starting 6 underclassmen, and they win the Big Ten championship. They get to Texas. To me, and not to them, for sure, not to them, but to me, the rest is kind of gravy. I'm just so excited with the way this team stacks up going forward.
And as much as, right, like no short shrift to Hannah Katie and Angela Zidak, and I'm sure they want to go as far as they possibly can, but each of them is leaving Northwestern with 3 rings on their finger, and it's a testament to everything that they've done, and it's phenomenal. But at the same time, right, like you can look at the way Kelsey Nader's been playing down the stretch. You can look at Emma Ray. Emma Ray has developed into, right, probably like one of the most feared and respected catchers in the Big Ten by the end of her freshman year, right, and on and on. So yeah,
Big Ten all defense as a freshman. I mean,
to go from Jordan Rudd to Emma Ray, I mean, that's just.
Well, let's not short Sammy Netling. Northwestern has had 13 straight, potentially if Emma Ray continues, You're talking about 13 straight years of, in my opinion, one of the 2 best defensive catchers in the Big Ten. I mean, it doesn't get any better than that, so.
Well, hey, Noah, we could have you on all night, and we could talk about these teams all night. And, when we see each other in person, we do talk about this forever. But we don't want to take up too much more of your night. Definitely appreciate you coming on with us to kind of prepare us for this weekend's games. Thursday, and then, of course, the softball over the weekend. Thank you so much, and let everyone know where they can find you.
Yeah, I'm at Coffman_Noah on Twitter. That's COFFMAN_Noah. You can find me broadcasting field hockey back in the fall. No more broadcasts left in the spring, unfortunately. And you can find me watching softball this weekend for sure, and lacrosse on Thursday, of course. But yeah, that's what I'll be doing. I'll be tweeting about it over there on Twitter. I'm not calling it that other name.
What other name? I mean, there is no other name.
Exactly right. Join me over there. Love to have everybody, get on the bandwagon. And hey, what, another phenomenal spring sports year. This athletics program as a whole is just trending in such a good direction right now. It's just such a fun time to be a Wildcats fan, guys. I know you agree with me.
Last question. Do you know if they're rolling in the steel girders as soon as the game is over on Thursday to start building up the stadium around on the lake?
I have a little bit of limited inside info, not much, but I know that they're going to start construction fast. And I know, I can say this, this is something I know not many Northwestern fans care that much about, but I know that there's been conversations with the field hockey coaching staff about the way this will impact them. A team that I think is the best team in the country this upcoming fall. And there has been, the field hockey coaches are feeling good about, not being impacted too much. That's for me and my 4 diehard field hockey fan friends, but I'm excited about that too. Almost as excited as I am to watch football at the lake.
Well, once again, Noah, thanks so much for jumping on, and have a great night. If you or a loved one is seriously injured by someone else's negligence, hire Kent Simpson of the Simpson Law Group. After over a decade prosecuting murder cases in Chicago, Simpson opened his own firm focused on wrongful death and personal injury cases. He specializes in car, truck, motorcycle, boat, and other transportation accidents, as well as construction accidents, medical negligence, slip and falls, product liability, and more. Millions recovered for clients, no fee unless he wins. The Simpson Law Group, compassion, empathy, and vigorous advocacy. Go to simpsonlawgroup.com or call 312-332-2107 for a free consultation, and go Cats. Once again, thanks to Noah Coffman for taking the time, jumping on with us. Just a huge weekend coming up. Thursday, and then the softball over the weekend. But as you mentioned off the top, that is not the only news. While yes, we are coming to the end of the road for the spring sports, fall sports right around the corner. Football news is coming fast and furious. I mean, I know a lot of people were bemoaning the fact that Brandon Sullivan.
Is it?
Yeah, people were bemoaning the fact that Brandon Sullivan decided he'd go play for Kirk Ferentz and score even fewer points than he was here at Northwestern. That's all well and good, but Mike Wright transfers in, played at Vanderbilt, played at Mississippi State, and now is going to come in and presumptively be the starter for the Cats moving forward.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it remains to be seen if he's if he's the actual starter. Like, it is interesting. We now have two SEC transfer quarterbacks on the roster, both who started a full season in the SEC, in Ryan Helinski and Mike Wright. They pretty much could not be more different as quarterbacks. But you kind of alluded to a lot of the consternation when Brendan Sullivan announced his transfer, and then of course a lot of none of us like Iowa. You hate to see a Wildcat go to Iowa, though we certainly wish him the best of luck when he's not playing us. But I think we said this on the pod last week. Like, it's hard to know how to evaluate Sullivan's transfer without knowing what's coming back. And we thought that this might be what was in the cards. And this is a guy in Mike Wright that Northwestern recruited very heavily out of high school. And then again, when he transferred from Vanderbilt to Mississippi State before last season, he clearly is excited about Lujan and Braun. That's what he said a number of times through different outlets about his transfer. And he is an absolutely blazing fast quarterback, maybe the fastest guy we've had at QB in since Coulter.
Yeah. It's funny, Coulter was Coulter was specifically
faster than Coulter, maybe.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think he might be. I mean, I was watching, grinding a bunch of Vandy tape from back in the day where the announcers are repeatedly calling him the SEC's fastest quarterback. So if he's most likely the fastest quarterback in the Big Ten now, which is pretty incredible when you consider that our top two are probably he and Jack Lausch, who's also blazing fast. And right, those two guys will most likely battle for the job, and it'll be a straight-up competition. I'm glad you brought up Coulter, though, because this is, I think, one of the things hanging over Mike Wright is everyone can look. I mean, his tools jump off the film, right? He's so fast. He's got the arm. He can make all the throws. But his accuracy is lower, right, overall. I mean, he's, I think, career 55% completions. But when I think about Coulter, I think about the way that I think there was so much hand-wringing, right, that, we felt that he wasn't being used effectively a lot of the time. He was in that rotation with Trevor Siemian, which wasn't good for either of them, and ultimately had a real negative effect on both of them. And that just the general feeling that you could roll into, just an entire decade of feeling like Northwestern wasn't getting the most out of its players from an offensive perspective, right? And that's where the Lujan piece looms over all of this, right? Because you can look at the Mike Wright numbers and be like, yes, but so much of that was when he was saddled with an awful Vanderbilt team that had just was not in any games at all, right? And it's like, this is a guy with massive raw tools, unbelievable speed and a strong arm and confidence and a willingness to make throws. And you pair that with this young wonderkind OC in Zach Lujan, and it's hard not to get really excited about it.
Yeah, I always like to look at how quarterbacks improve, and Wright's lowest year was certainly his sophomore year as a starter at Vanderbilt. 10 games, 53% completion. He was up at 57 the following 2 years with 10 games at Vanderbilt, and then he played in all 12 last year at Mississippi State. So you can see the growth there. You can see the decision making. He doesn't throw a lot of picks. He doesn't attempt a ton of passes in these places either. I have to think based on the stats at Mississippi that he was splitting time. I haven't dug into all that as of yet, but I think like the thing that is different this year from all the prior years is we have hired a certified wonderkind as the offensive coordinator. We've never had a young up and coming coach of this stature on either side of the ball until we hired Braun as DC last spring. And that doesn't mean that Northwestern is going to come out and score 50 points a game next year, but
it also doesn't mean that. Just,
Well, I just think the average fan is not quite. He's just not quite prepared for the creativity and thinking that is going to be on display. And I say this not because I've been reading a bunch of articles pumping up Lujan. I say this because like some of the best NFL scheme analysts that I follow are stoked about this dude and are talking about this dude. And that, like, there's no Northwestern coach who's been on the radar of up and coming coaching trees in that kind of way ever.
No, I mean, like, when was the last time a coach got hired away from Northwestern?
Well, that's happened. I mean, we talked about how they were, the same for all those years, right, on the staff. And then we've had a few guys hired away.
Sure,
right?
I mean, position coaches to the NFL.
A little more
right.
lately, yeah.
Yeah, but like what you have not seen is, and it was by design. I think Fitz very, very candidly espoused the value of having a stable coaching staff. He wanted that. And I think it worked for him to a certain degree until it didn't. But this guy, like Lujan's going to be a rocket ship. Like we should all prepare ourselves that he's going to go get a bigger job in 2 or 3 years. And that's okay.
May that happen.
That's what has happened.
May we ride that rocket ship.
Exactly. And so what that means is what you've seen, like the raw tools you talk about, John, that's what Lujan's looking at. And clearly Wright was a guy that the staff identified and wanted to go after immediately. And so these are the things, like, of course, an injury or something weird could like make it not work out, whatever. Like football is a lot harder to project in this fashion than hoops or other, sports with a little less variability. But the reality is that all kind of the contextual surrounding subtleties around this point, the arrow is pointing extremely up, and that's very, very exciting.
One thing that I really want to talk about too, talking about Mike Wright, I feel like when we talk about Mike Wright, we also need to talk about Jack Lausch, and I think this is something, I don't want to say we were guilty of not talking. Well, when everything was happening with Sullivan, I don't want to say we were guilty of not talking about Jack Lausch enough, because I think we were not in possession of information that I think we've since become in possession of that information after talking with a bunch of people who are close to the football team, who made us really aware that throughout the spring, and I think some people suspected this, but Jack Lausch and Brendan Sullivan was a very, very tight quarterback competition. And also that Jack Lausch displayed tremendous leadership, and the team naturally really gravitates to him. He's a natural leader. He is very liked and respected on the team. And we know about the raw tools. I mean, we haven't seen him throw the football that much, but we know about the speed, and we know what we've seen him do on the field, right? Well, one of the things that we talked about when Wright first committed to Northwestern was off the field, Wright is incredibly respected too. This is a high character guy, a tremendous student, like I think all conference student, honor roll kind of guy, very academically focused, very just focused on all of the right things. A guy who it's really easy to get behind. So
on that note, sorry to interrupt. Did you guys see the YouTube video of him just rattling off like the first 100 digits of pi because he had memorized like different player combinations and the numbers, for different players.
No,
is
but
incredible.
That's fantastic. And then when you're like, that's also one of the fastest quarterbacks in the country. But I mean, the point being, right? That's two quarterbacks in Mike Wright and Jack Lausch who share that character and leadership quality, right? And then on the field are very similar types of football players. These are very fast, mobile quarterbacks, right? So if you're Zach Lujan, I think the question isn't so much like, well, which guy's one and which guy's two. It's that you have a synthesis between the two guys. Whatever system he wants to install, they're both going to be able to run it, and they're both going to need to run it. I'm sure they're both going to play for big chunks of the season next year. But I mean, you add all that up, and it's like, right, with everything that Scuzz was saying, like this young guy, this rocket ship that we're all hoping to ride for a couple of years as he like displays his genius, he's got a specific type of quarterback with, again, are we talking about Tom Brady out there? No. This is one guy who's thrown like no college passes, another guy who his career accuracy stands at 55-something%. But man, are there a lot of raw tools, and man, is that a lot of weapons for a guy. And we should mention while we're here, when Mike Wright visited, the three guys who hosted him on his visit were AJ Henning, Bryce Kurtz, and CJ Johnson. And damn it, is that a lot of speed in one room. That's so much speed. And keep in mind, this is also a team that can put Joseph Hyman on the field anytime they want to, right? And then you've got guys like Frank Covey, etc., right? That is so much friggin' speed. If you're a Northwestern fan of any kind of age, right, above a certain point, you're nodding as I say, it has not ever been thus at the skill positions.
And on that point, every time I've heard Zach Lujan talk, which isn't much, but when he has spoken, he's spoken about how his scheme is wrapped around speed. So, you're just speed on speed, and I love it.
Oh,
yeah, Mark Gronowski, who we've talked about a lot, is the QB at South Dakota State, who we thought might be a transfer candidate for Northwestern. 4.3 yards per carry last year, rushed almost 100 carries last year. He had over 100 the year prior, 83 the year before that. Ran for 27 touchdowns over those 3 years. Like this is clearly a part of the offense, and I love what you said, John, about how Lausch and Wright are similar, because it does allow you to build identity, and that's it's one of the biggest problems we had with Bajakian's offense in the years that it wasn't working, because there was no identity, and it would change week to week, and it was just kind of preposterous to try to figure out. And so you love to see this stuff. Like, are we going to come out and be throwing 50-yard bombs every third play? Probably not. It's probably not going to look like some of the success that we had in 2020 when Ramsey was throwing deep so effectively at the beginning of the year. So I think none of us know what it's going to look like till we get there. I think the one other thing that I have heard from the NFL analysts that I alluded to earlier is just Lujan runs really smart schemes, but he packages them really well. So much of the game today is what you can do to disguise what you're doing pre-snap, and then even to disguise what you're doing post-snap. And that's true on both sides of the ball. And the excitement around Lujan is that he is right in the mix. You think Mike McDaniel with the Dolphins, you think about Shanahan with the Niners, and it's all about personnel groupings that allow you to do a ton of different things and to hide it and be multiple. So the defense doesn't know what's happening. Even after the snap, a couple seconds into the play, they still don't know what is happening. That's a massive advantage for the offense. And if you've got a coach that not only knows how to design that and call it, but to teach it, which is a critical failing, we think, from one of our recent defensive coordinators at Northwestern.
Who could you be talking about? I don't even know.
Yeah, that's huge. So that feels like a skill set that is coming in, and when you couple it with identity and what looks like really solid recruiting, I remember last year we were all super excited about Braun because of everything he was doing on the field, and everybody who was a little hesitant was like, well, can he recruit? Hey, folks, it looks like he can recruit. The level hasn't dropped off, and that's pretty friggin' exciting.
Have you ever thought about building a Westlaw Pirates-like community for your business? If so, we've got your solution. Teamworks Media, a brand marketing and content company, is here to help you tell your brand story better. Better yet, you can work directly with the founder, Jay Sharman, known on this podcast as Like the Posts. The same expertise he's brought to brands like ESPN, the Big Ten Conference, and Northwestern University are now available to you in an affordable way, directly with this Wildcat superfan. Contact Jay directly at 312-446-9435 or jay@teamworksmedia.com to learn how to elevate your brand story. Well, yeah, I mean, his recruiting was in great display as we got 2 commitments just today from what was a huge recruiting weekend. I believe 16 guys were on campus to check out the program, and kind of reminded me a little bit of last year. When you had this giant group come in, and a number of commits came out of that. We know 2 have announced. Brandon Blewett, a wide receiver out of Texas, and also today Marquette Dorsey Jr. Committed, cornerback, speed demon out of DePaul Catholic in New Jersey. Had offers from Penn State, Florida, Stanford, Wisconsin. To be able to get both those guys in is just absolutely huge. And, we didn't even mention Trey Boyd, giant offensive lineman who committed just a couple days ago. So there will probably be more coming out of this weekend.
There's one. Well, I guess what didn't come out of this weekend, but there's one.
Oh yeah, no,
that we got today.
Yeah, I hadn't even gotten to him, but Cooper Lovelace, offensive lineman, grad transfer out of Southern Cal, making an in-conference transfer, which you don't see so much. Sorry, I'm going to make that joke until it's not funny to me.
Yeah, right.
It's you said it. I was like, "What? What are you talking about? It's not in conference, but you're
Yeah,
right.
it is.
You're right. My brain is just going to be continually baked in like the future state where so many teams from the West Coast join the Big Ten that they basically create the Pac-10 and the Big Ten within the Big Ten. I'm already living in that future reality.
Sure, no, and that makes sense.
I mean, you truly can't overstate, though, how monster of a couple days this has been from the recruiting front. I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, Trey Boyd, he's got, I think, 9 Power 5 offers, but he's from Minnesota.
Can't say Power 5 anymore.
Yeah,
it's Power 4
right.
now.
Yeah, that's right, P4. But
RIP Pac-12.
But 9 big...
How dare you diminish Oregon
the
State and Washington State?
That's right.
The 2-pack, yeah.
But he's from Minnesota, had a Minnesota offer, and many more. And Northwestern went in and got him. So when you're evaluating Braun as a recruiter, it's like, there you go. That's a big-time guy who Northwestern needs, and they went into his home state and got him over his home state school, right? And Blewett and Dorsey, I mean, Rivals has them both rated just under 4-star prospects, right? And at wide receiver, that's big time, right? And Blewett's a big frame wide receiver to be pulling in. And Dorsey, right, the offers. I mean, this guy, right, Penn State, Florida, Stanford, and chooses to go to Northwestern. That's big time recruiting. That's selling the program, right? It's awesome.
Well, this is a direct. This is exactly what we talked about last year because the recruiting class was underwhelming. Real talk, Braun and his staff did not have a whole year to go after that class. There were obviously, we know that there were top guys in that class who decommitted after the Fitzgerald news, et cetera, and just a lot of uncertainty around the program. This is what happens when you have a coaching change. We haven't gone through it in a long, long time. This is just pretty typical, and to see Braun and his staff hitting the trail to this effect the following year, it's not just about the stars. It's what's much more important are they're winning recruiting battles against other Big Ten teams. And that's massive. It's what you want to see. That's kind of like the primary hallmark of success in recruiting. Now, obviously, what really matters is, when the rubber meets the road on the field in a couple of years. But this is as good of a second stanza as we could have hoped for.
Absolutely. And I mean, you start looking and it's like, look, right, like you were saying, they inherited a really rough recruiting situation and they're making their best. And as we know, and Braun has even stated this, we're all familiar with the Northwestern standards and everything that does from a recruiting perspective and selling the special. But it's like, lest we forget, like, this team already got a commitment from, for example, Caden O'Rourke, right? Devin O'Rourke's younger brother, right? Who was a big-time in-state recruit. At some point, you look at all these guys stacking up, and it stops being like, oh, we pulled in another individual guy. Oh, we got another commitment from another individually good guy. It's like, no, this is just a good class that's taking shape. That these coaches have done a really good job recruiting. Like, they're putting their own stamp on recruiting at this university. Lovelace is a fascinating guy, and a guy who I think, again, like as many high fives should be going around about him, mainly because of injuries. The offensive line is just a depleted unit as things currently stand. I mean, we're very much hoping that Josh Thompson and Jordan Knox get healthy and get healthy as quickly as they can, because we need those guys. But from a depth standpoint, like, that's a position group that needs quality players right now, and several transfers have come in. But Lovelace is, from a football standpoint, a fascinating individual. Like, this guy was one of the JUCO ranks best offensive linemen a couple of years ago at Butler Community College, to the point that he had a USC offer. I think he had Florida. He had Oklahoma State. He was being actively recruited. And then for whatever reason, just kind of ended up in a logjam at USC. And again, we're talking about USC. This is the line blocking for Caleb Williams. Like, this, I mean, we know about USC's problems on the defensive side of the ball, but, like, offense was where their bread was buttered, and he was just in a logjam behind that offensive line. And when he entered the portal as a grad transfer, I mean, he kind of intimated as much to Louis Vaquer that basically he was kind of like, look, I'm keeping this really quiet. I do not communicate to anybody about this, etc., because my phone's already blowing up enough and I don't need it blowing up anymore. Like, Cooper Lovelace is a known commodity, and he's viewed as a very good offensive lineman who has played sparingly. And that is, considering the way Northwestern's hamstrung relative to getting guys in through the portal, a massive pickup at a position of need.
Yeah, it's big. It's big, and, like, we had a hunch that we were going to get some movement. After spring practice, the second transfer portal window closed, so everyone who's in the portal is in the portal. And this was about last year when Ben Bryant came and committed as well. So early part of May. So it all works out, and we'll see what happens. We've got. Like I said earlier, spring sports coming to an end. Summer is fast approaching. With it, we should be hearing the announcement pretty soon of what games will be played on the lakefront. I believe, because you talked to the ticket rep, they said something like the next week or so.
Yeah, well, no, the games were clear. So pricing's going to come out in the next week or so, and then season ticket holders are going to get a chance to buy, I think, up to whatever they owned previously, up to 4. So if you owned 4 before, you should be able to buy up to 4. If you owned 2 before, you should buy up to 2. If you owned 6 before, unfortunately, you're only going to be able to buy up to 4. And that's going to come together in June. But what they told me is 5 games on the lake, and then Ohio State and Illinois will be at Wrigley. So I apologize if I'm breaking news that I shouldn't be breaking, but, like, seems like any season ticket holder can get that information if they just call the ticket office and ask. So that's Miami of Ohio, Duke, Eastern Illinois, and then Wisconsin and Indiana?
I just want to
it would be Indiana.
I just want to
those are the 5.
I just want to kind of rewind, right? And jump in a time machine for a second and go back to a place where someone was like, all right, there are 7 home games on the schedule. I want you to envision the best possible scenario for where those 7 games could be. And us being like, I don't know, We'll probably have to go to Soldier a couple times, couple Seat Geeks, and maybe, hopefully, we.
Well, I think best case would have been Soldier and Wrigley.
Right, and it's like,
but we knew that wasn't possible, and we knew it was going to be Soldier and Wrigley and SeatGeek and oh shit, Lambeau. That's the reality we were living 2 months ago. Folks.
It's like nope, two in Wrigley, 5 in this magical stadium on the lake. I mean, it's literally the best case scenario. If you're searching for a better option than this, stop searching. It doesn't exist. This is realistically as good as it possibly could have worked out.
It's so phenomenal. Anyone worried about tailgating? They're talking about shuttles from the West Lot. They're talking about designated tailgating spaces in garages on campus. They're trying to open up campus parking. Like it's going to be great. It's going to be really, really, really good. Now it's not going to be Ryan Field. If you've been doing the same routine for however many years as a season ticket holder, it is going to be a little different, and it's going to take all of us a little bit of getting used to. But yeah, John, you're spot on. This is the best possible scenario for what is going on, rebuilding, our Purple Palace up on Central Street.
Anything else to mention before we get out of here tonight, guys? I mean, jam-packed episode.
I was going to say, I just want to say that we weren't exactly sure whether we were going to be recording Monday night or Tuesday night, right? And if we'd recorded Monday night, we would have missed 3 commits. So by the time whenever this goes up, we don't know exactly when it's going to go up, but the way this week is going, who knows how many more guys are going to have committed by the time you listen to this, but that's what they call a good problem. That's a champagne problem. This is shaping up to be an epic recruiting week. And I think we're all glad to be along for the ride.
For sure. I mean, yeah. I would say the odds of me putting up a preamble before the music hits on this episode, fairly high, I would imagine. We'll see.
And hey, let's go shock number 1 Texas. Let's go down to Austin and shock the softball world.
Absolutely. With that, we'll go ahead and leave it there for tonight. Head to our website, westlawpirates.com, where you can leave comments and questions. Find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube at Westlaw Pirates. And you can always email the show, westlawpirates@gmail.com. Tune in next time as we give our visceral and statistical views on Northwestern athletics. Look for us in the west lot of Ryan Field flying the red pirate flag, because we give no quarter, especially the 4th. For John Lacombe and Eric Scasbo, I'm Sam Walter. Thanks so much for listening. We'll see you next time.